will now begin the first session of the forum, which is session 1, the roundtable co-hosted with Brazil on leveraging long-term energy scenarios to attract investments, bridging planning and funding for energy transitions. So before we start, this session is moderated by Elizabeth Gillespie, Director of Financial Services at Ernst & Young. But before we start, we'll have some interventions from participants online, and I'd like to just check that their videos are working. So Natasha, Lucia, Claire, and Vivian, please try put your cameras on and maybe just say hi so that we make sure it's working.
Natasha Mazzol here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but we cannot see you. Is your camera on?
Yes, my camera is on. I can see myself.
You can see. Okay, great. So we will work on that. And then next is Lucia. Lucia, are you online? Can you hear us? Okay, we'll try and get Lucia because we can't hear her or see her. Claire, could you please say something? Claire, Vivian, are you online? Can you hear us? Okay. So I think the team will reach out to you and work on that. We couldn't hear you though. But now I'll pass it on to Elizabeth Gillespie. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Can I check that you can hear me before we start, or should I move this closer? Okay. I'm generally quite loud, so it shouldn't be an issue, but just checking. Okay, good. So hi, everyone. I'm really glad to welcome you all here again today, guests in the room and online, to the first roundtable session here over the next 3 days, which I'm sure will be full of really fruitful and productive discussions. So again, I'm Elizabeth Gillespie. I work at Ernst & Young in London, where I'm a director in my team. And we work with financial services clients in the private sector all over the world to help them sort of incorporate climate considerations into how they measure and manage financial risk. And so over the last few years, I've worked with my financial institution clients and seen how they use scenarios in a variety of different ways. And I'll give you a few different examples of that to give a flavor of what I'm talking about. So I worked recently with a global bank in the private sector to work with them to look at effectively projecting their different losses through time under a range of different scenarios, and also to help them identify risks and opportunities across a few different sectors. Another example is I've seen institutions start to look at scenarios as a way to help them assess the transition plans of their counterparties. And as they've also started to integrate considerations from these scenarios into their credit risk ratings, which then also flow through and influence how they price their loans as well. And I think perhaps the most interesting example is one that we're seeing, especially in the UK, with a lot of, or at least with some of the larger banks, is they're actually looking at a range of different scenarios, ones that come from the IEA, ones that come from Network for Greening the Financial System, and sort of picking and choosing and coming up with sort of bespoke, customized scenarios of their own that are intended to reflect where they think the world is going. So the most credible or most likely outlook that they see, so that they can sort of reevaluate, realign, reassess their portfolios, and as well their sort of intermediate net zero targets. So at the risk of stating the obvious, a lot of the banking clients that I work with, they're very sensitive to funding new technologies such as hydrogen, and also to over concentrating their portfolios in the build of renewables. However, they are actively seeking to adapt, and they're looking for ways to improve their risk mitigation strategies so that they can contribute greater amounts of sustainable financing to the clean energy transition. And I think equipping these financial institutions with really as credible and plausible energy plans and scenarios offers a really powerful potential tool for them to be able to extend climate financing more readily and mobilize and attract financial resources more in that space. I think I may be preaching to the choir here, but according to the Climate Policy Initiative, the energy system in particular needs around $2 trillion annually to reach its net zero ambitions by 2050. And currently there's a significant gap in the level of financing that we're seeing. So I think events like this are really important because we need stakeholders from across different industries, energy and finance included, to really come to the table and figure out what can we do to address that mismatch moving forward. And so that brings us all back to the objective of the reason we're here today to have this discussion. And in this discussion, we want to explore how long-term planning energy frameworks and scenarios can be used to mobilize climate funds and attract financial resources. So hopefully by the end of this session, we'll all walk away with increased understanding of the role of long-term national energy planning and what's really needed in this space to help enable greater financing for the energy transition, especially when it comes to the global south. So I think we alluded to this earlier, but in terms of how the session will run, we'll have a few short presentations just to start and help us set the scene. And then we'll move on to some more prepared interventions. So thanks to everyone who prepared. I'll be calling on you shortly. And then we'll open it up to more moderated discussion. Again, if you're here in the room, I'll do my best to call on you if I can see your name tag, or I'll point at you, whatever. And online, if you can just stick your hand up and someone will incorporate you into the conversation. Okay, great. So to kick off the session, we have Gustavo Nassif de Andrade, who's the Deputy Head of Energy Economics for Brazil's Energy Research Office. And he's going to share some insights with us on the importance of this topic, especially in the context of Brazil's G20 presidency. So Gustavo, if I may, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Irina, for the invitation. And we have been for long active participant of the LTES. And currently, I do have a few slides, but currently we have been the opportunity to work on the energy transitions working group of the G20. EPE, that is the place where I work, is a federal institution that is mainly linked to the Ministry of Mines and Energy in Brazil. We have the responsibility of developing the studies that will help them to make the public policies that they are in charge. And we are also responsible for developing the long-term plans and energy plans. And so that's why we are here, yeah. We are going, it's not moving forward. Not at all. Oh, yeah. So just to give some context and to be really brief, the Brazilian presidency of G20 has set 3 priorities for the energy transition working group. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Uh, so the first is exactly about what we are going to discuss here today is accelerating financing for the energy transitions. That is a topic that is really crucial. The other topic is the social dimension of the energy transitions, and also a topic that is the innovative perspective on sustainable fuels. Uh, all this, of course, all these priorities is really correlated with energy planning, with long-term energy scenarios. But today we are going to focus a little bit more on the accelerate finance, as it is the main topic here for our discussions. If someone, oh yeah, oh, I think I got it. So just to give a little bit of context, it's what was mentioned before. To move forward on this energy transition, investments need to grow a lot. We see, for example, this study of Irina saying that the annual investment must be more multiplied by more than 4 to remain on the pathway to 1.5. If we take another study for that IEA developed and looking a little bit more for emerging economies, we see that this challenge is even higher. We have to sixfold these investments in the next 10 years, according to IEA. So the financing and investment is a big issue for us, for all the countries, but also for the emerging economies. And now I will talk a little bit about the proposal. And before taking the slides, I would like to say a little bit about the process that we developed in the ETWG, that is the working group in the G20 that is discussing this. And since the beginning of the year, we are working a lot on this priority of financing, and we have been able to build the consensus that energy planning is a tool for increasing the investment and finance in clean energy infrastructure. And by energy planning, we mean technical and institutional capacities to collect, analyze data, build and model scenarios, use an holistic approach to offer evidence for the energy policy making and its evaluation, as well as connecting the energy planning with other relevant issues such as socioeconomic development, industry, climate, and other ones. So we do believe, and this was part of the discussion, that energy planning is key for building trust in energy transition, while also demonstrating the scale and complexity of this process, and that we need to balance affordability, security, and sustainability. So this was also one of the things that we discussed there. And also that energy planning has proven to significantly contribute to de-risking the investment in clean energy transition by offering stakeholders transparency, predictability, consistency over time, and consistency with long-term energy climate goals. So we do believe that energy planning is something that it's a kind of igniting this challenge that we have, that of increasing the investments. And we also recognize that addressing the gap of in investment in clean energy transition, especially for emerging economies, requires more than finance resource. Building a portfolio of projects and reducing the cost of capital could be achieved with the contribution of energy planning. And this is explain a little bit one of the proposals that we are currently discussing at the G20 group. That is the Global Coalition for Energy Planning. I will highlight a little bit of the structure and governance that we are thinking about this global coalition. We are thinking about this global coalition as a voluntary alliance open to all interest countries, international organizations, and relevant stakeholders committed to advancing in global energy planning. The leadership of this coalition, and again, I'm saying about something that is being discussed or is still being discussed in the G20 group, but I'm giving some spoilers here, but the leadership of the coalition will rotate every 2 years. So this means that there will be some leading countries for this coalition. And the leading countries are expected to host the Energy Planning Summit, serving as a primary decision-making board of the coalition and responsible for setting the strategic direction of review in progress. The GC board is meant to drive the coalition's agenda forward between summits and facilitate the implementation of the voluntary priorities and challenges set under the GC framework. It should meet twice a year and have a composition of 15 geographically balanced representatives to guarantee that the diversity is something that we would like to have there. And we will have, and our proposal is to have a secretariat. The secretariat is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the coalition. It is meant to be taken by an international organization nominated by the lead country and confirmed by the GC members. Ideally, we think that the international organization should rotate also as the leading country. So, but for the first cycle, Brazil is proposing that Irina should be the first secretariat, including because of all this experience that they have with LTES, and we have a lot of synergies with this process. And with about resource, at this point, we think that GCP will operate on voluntary basis with member countries and organizations providing second staff and other in-kind contributions. This means that the coalition is not directly managing resources for capacity building projects. Instead, partner institutions will handle this. And also now talking a little bit the agenda for action, that is what is going to move this coalition forward. This is currently under construction, and we will be prioritized according to the countries that decided to engage in the coalition at the end of the day. But some critical areas that has been already discussed on the group discussions is transmission and distribution grid planning frameworks for addressing the need to integrate renewables and ensure more resilience, energy scenarios building, modeling, and the communication to ensure adequate ambition levels, but also effective consideration of security and affordability of supply and other policy goals, and integrated energy and mining planning, considering the need to scale supply chains of strategic minerals and materials. So in this context, we reaffirm that each country and region has its own circumstances regarding natural endowment, energy needs, and economic, political, and institutional and social challenges. This means there is no universal formula for energy planning. So Brazil is really excited to lead the first step of this initiative, and with close support of other national institutions as the National Development Bank of Brazil, BNDES, EPE, that is the institution that I represent here, and under the leadership of Minister of Mines and Energy, we are moving forward with this process. And we will work with the other countries and other organizations to build a relevant collaboration portfolio in preparation for the first energy planning summit that we are planning to have it in the next year in 2025. And we are happy to count on with the support of other institutions, other countries, and looking forward for the discussion. So thank you very much. I don't know if I take more than I meant to have, but I think that's an important issue.
Thanks very much for getting us started today, Gustavo. So I think now we have Asami Meketa, who is the head of energy planning and power sector transformation at IRENA, who's going to share with us some thoughts on energy planning for mobilizing finance. So Asami, if you're, I believe you're online. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hear you. Thanks.
Do you hear me and do you see
me? We can
me?
hear you.
Very good.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm very sorry that I cannot be there in person. I was really looking forward to join, but for the health reason, I needed to join virtually. And I'm still hoping that maybe tomorrow or the after tomorrow, I could still join if the health conditions allows me. Also, because this is the first time that I take the floor, I would also like to thank everyone for joining, and also for the virtual participants. I see now 140 people joined online. So I am very happy to see the people in the room, but also great to see lots of people joining remotely. I would like to thank also for Brazil for co-hosting this session. It has been great last few months working with them on the GSEP concepts and working towards this program. I also like to thank Elizabeth for joining and bringing the private sector perspective into this discussion. So today I have just 5 minutes, so I'm gonna be very quick. But I would like to speak a little bit about energy planning support work that IRENA has been working on. So I'm heading the energy planning support team, and that team portfolio includes LTES, but not only LTES, but also we have a long-standing program on the energy planning capacity building support. So what we do is to work with governments who want to enhance energy planning capacity, develop program. We also give hands-on modeling, training. We also help them to guide them and design the process for the stakeholder engagement. So we have been doing that for many, many years. And we have been mainly working with a lot of African countries, but not just African countries. We worked also with a country from the other regions. And in this exercise that we have been doing, we have faced some kind of misconception sometimes. And one of the misconceptions that we face is the long-term planning has nothing to do with a short-term investment, and that's actually quite surprisingly. Still, we have to explain how the long-term planning is such a critical element in creating conducive investment environment, and therefore it's relevant also for the near term. So that is something that we've been working with many member countries who want to enhance capacity for the long-term planning, and also to create really support for doing that. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we say is that it's if the planning is done properly, there are lots of benefit, and the benefit is near term. The first is that it aligns the stakeholders. It also accelerates project implementation. So if there is no long-term planning, then the project implementation actually starts from doing the planning properly. It can also avoid the investment mistake, meaning that sometimes there's like countries sometimes go into the short-term expensive solution because of the lack of long-term plans. And also countries sometimes have to face with a lot of unsolicited proposals. The long-term planning can give the framework to handle this more systematically. It also reduces uncertainties in policy direction and project selection. And it also mitigates investment risks for energy transition project. We had a great event last time in the G20 Energy Transition Working Group. We had a side event, and we heard a lot of good example of how the countries are actually using energy plans to mitigate investment risks. I hope that we can hear some of these examples again today. Next slide, please. And then in this, in the previous slide, I talked about if it is done properly, because another misconception is that countries sometimes say, oh, we already have plans, so we just need to do implementation. And that's sometimes true, but that's sometimes not true, because what's really relevant is long-term planning rather than plans. And some countries have plans that are given by donors, that are given by consultancy firms, and not really built on the national planning frameworks. So we say that if it's done properly with a good planning framework. And what we mean by good planning framework is what we are exploring under the LTES network. Under the LTES network, we have been really hearing a lot of great examples from the champions in energy planning, how they set up the institutions, how they set up the consultative framework, how they communicate, how they set the boundary for the scenarios. We have learned that there is no single solution because different countries have different circumstances and they choose different institutional setup to address the planning challenges. But in either way, the country needs to have a very good planning framework. And now we have been looking at the particularly the link between the investment and the planning in a quite dedicated way since the beginning of the LTS network, because the linking between the finance and the planning has been always the priority from the very inception of the LTES. So you can see that this is the third LTS forum where we discuss the nexus between the energy planning and the investment. The 2019 LTS forum was the very first forum, and there we already discussed with some national banks on how the scenarios are used to attract investments. And then more recently, we have organized events around this theme at the IRENA Assembly, at the IRENA Council, and more recently, since this year, we have strengthened collaboration with the G20 Energy Transition Working Group, particularly with the Brazilian proposal of the Global Coalition for Energy Planning, which we are very, very happy to be part of. We have organized a side event, as I mentioned, and we also started last week the webinar series looking at the looking at specifically energy planning frameworks to mobilize investment. This is Irina's contribution to G20 framework, and the outcome of this webinar series. So this series started last year, and this session is actually the second one in the series, and we will have 2 more sessions. And the results of this webinar series will be discussed at the SEM, the upcoming SEM, as a contribution to the SEM and to support G20. Next slide, please. So for the G20, we have been also developing a report to support, to summarize what we have learned and collected from countries' examples. For example, we have collected some countries going really like beyond just using planning as a fundamental for the creating conducive environment for the investment, but also to go even further to create a special institutional framework to align and to work with financial institutions within the country. For example, like we have collected example from Brazil, who is obviously leading this discussion. Also Costa Rica, Philippines, El Salvador, Italy. So we have documented these good example in the G20 reports. And we are hoping to hear more of these examples today during this roundtable. And in this slide, I would also like to just mention that we have done, as Roland and Juan Jose mentioned, we have a dashboard of energy planning. So we have identified national planning documents. And also this afternoon, Iris will be presenting the some of the results of the assessment of the alignment of planning documents from energy planning and from the LTES. And this exercise was done by Iris and Anna mainly. And they were looking into these documents, energy planning documents, and looked for information or reference to the financial information in the energy planning documents. So we thought that it might be also relevant for this discussion. I was quite happy to see that this analysis, it was not meant to be a main analysis, but it came out as a very nice piece of analysis. So we wanted to mention briefly. So we've documented how a selection of over 50 countries are incorporating financial information into their energy and climate plans, and to analyze the possible impacts that this could have in terms of mobilization of finance or investment attraction. And we have, these are still like very preliminary findings, but 4 preliminary findings I'm gonna briefly mention. So the high relevance of financial sections. So what we have found is that a significant majority of energy and climate planning documents, like the significant meaning like 90%, includes a dedicated finance section. And that may improve their transparency and make it easier for potential investors to find and understand the financial implication of the plans. However, while many plans include financial strategy and identify funding sources, only just over half of the energy and climate planning documents specify estimated investment amounts, and also fewer includes timelines. And then energy planning documents tend to offer more detailed investment insights. So the LTES documents appear to provide more granular financial details, with some even presenting investment needs at the project level. The last point is that least developing countries often include more detailed financial information than other country categories. So the analysis indicated that the least developing developed countries generally provide more detailed financial estimates and timelines than other countries like middle income and developing countries. And this is to enhance transparency and align with international investment or aid requirements. And this can make LTS, like least developing countries, more attractive to investors. It's also important to note that financial details alone may not guarantee the investment, of course. So these are very promising areas of work. So we will keep working on it. But this is all what I wanted to contribute at this point. And I now return it to the moderator. Thank you very much. And I look forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Is this working? There we go. Wow. Okay. Thank you, Asami, for those remarks. That was really helpful context for us. Okay, so now we have a few, I'm going to ask some questions to some of the different representatives that we have in the room and online. I think there are a few folks who have confirmed they're happy to share some interventions in the first instance. So I'll ask a question and direct it to certain folks. Again, here in the room, but if you have something sort of pre-prepared that you'd like to share as well, feel free to do that. Or if you have slides that you'd like to share, I think we can facilitate that as well. Okay, so the first question that I'd like to pose to the group is really geared towards the countries that we have in the room. And that question is, how has your respective country integrated climate finance criteria into national energy planning in order to gain funding for clean energy projects? And I think we did have a volunteer, Francisco, from Chile's Ministry of Energy, kindly volunteered to be our first contributor today. Please, Francisco.
Thank you. Well, that's a kind of tough question, but I'll try to do my best. In Chile, in particular, the energy market is private, so everything goes by a private point of view. We as a government try to make the ground rules so we can make public the private decisions affordable. I don't know. How do we get funding for climate change projects? We try as a government to make the ground rules for the energy market to develop. We make energy transition on maybe the transmission line, the power lines are affordable to access for the private sector. So we can have solar power plants on the north side of the country or wind projects on the south to get the energy to the center. We have a very long and narrow country, so power lines are very important. And the funding, we try to make that that way. Maybe on some kind of projects we fund, it's not very common, but on emerging technologies, such as CSP, for example, for power, solar concentrated power, we had a little funding from the government to make the first kind of its kind power plant. It was a very good project. Maybe geothermal that came from a little funding from the government. So we try to do that kind of things. We are working now on the long term, talking about the long term. We have some policy that's starting. We call it development poles. So what's about the development poles? We detect some strategic regions that has, for example, a lot of sun. And we say, okay, that region could be nice to have PV plants or CSP plants or maybe wind plants. And we detect that region and we say, okay, it would be nice for the foreseeable future to have that kind of technologies in that section. But for the private sector, it could be hard to build a power line to connect to the system. So we kind of concentrate all those projects, 10, 20, 30 projects, and say, okay, we put them together and we build one power line to connect to the main line. So it would be more from the private sector point of view, would be much more secure project than, I don't know, I stand in the middle of the desert and I don't know how I'm going to connect to the main line. So we're doing that kind of things to secure the energy transition.
Great, thanks for that perspective. I think we also have Jessica from the Mining and Energy Planning Unit of Columbia in the room. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you. Right, thank you so much. Thank you to the previous speakers. I'm just taking very detailed notes, some good experiences that we could replicate in Colombia. I'm Jessica from the Mining and Energy Planning Unit, which is part of the Mining and Energy Ministry. We are in charge of the long-term energy planning. For Colombia, well, it hasn't been an easy path. I have to say that it's still a work in progress. We are struggling with a lot of different situations, but I can say that we are working really hard to integrate all sectors, because what we have seen is that we need a structured framework that align these long-term scenarios with the financial strategies. And in that case, we need to involve different sectors to construct something that is sustainable in time. We are working with the Environment Ministry, the Mining and Energy Ministry, of course, Finance, Commerce, with private sector, with Household Minister, Labor Minister, etc. Because for Colombia, it's not only a matter of emissions and financing renewables, but also facing with the fact that we are a net exporter of fossil fuels. So our economy is also needs to change in all aspects. So we need to have this conversation with all the ministries, all the sectors, and of course with the population. We started with having a green taxonomy, a national climate finance strategy, and now seeing how also include the labor force in these aspects. We're now using the scenarios to build a portfolio of strategic investments. And this is a work in progress. And now trying to just knock doors and communicate how we see that these investments should be going, in which sectors specifically, not only from the supply of energy, but also in the demand sectors. And well, something that we believe it gives a message, a very clear message, is the work about slowly dismantling the fossil fuel subsidies, which has been a really hard work, but I think we are getting there. And it's showing a message that we need to start looking not only the private investments, but also the public investments directed to another sectors, specifically in renewables. And we are struggling in how to effectively communicate. So I think here we need as much help as possible. We need other voices from external institutions, independent institutions, to also help us to better communicate that this is not some crazy ideas from a group of people, which I think Chile probably have had the same issues, but also to show that this is something that has to be done in order to guarantee that our country will have a competitive economy also in the future. So in there, I think then again we are knocking doors and asking for help for our friends, because we in that case need to better communicate the results of the scenarios, and also to align with the investment needs right now. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Maybe Gustavo, would you and your team like to share perspectives from Brazil on this question as well?
Yes, I think we do face similar challenges. Currently in Brazil, we are in the process, and Camila might be the person that can talk more about that. But we are currently developing a taxonomy, and we are facing also some challenges because we have to somehow be able to make this discussion considering the country necessities, but also the country's potentialities. So it's in the very beginning of the process. Yes, Camila. I don't know if you wanted to add something.
It's one case that we are studying. No, it's exactly that. We are in the beginning of this development of the green taxonomy for Brazil, and Colombia is one of the cases. Colombia, Mexico, they are a little bit more advanced in this discussion about the taxonomy development. Please, Nassif, go on.
And also about the investments. We have been, the government has been announcing a lot of investments in the energy transition. Energy transition at the government at this point is at the center of most of the plans that has been announced. For example, the Minister of Economy of Brazil is launching the ecological transformation plan. One of its axes is energy transition. Our Minister of Industry has been developing a new industrial policy, mission-oriented, and one of the missions is about energy transition and decarbonizing the economy and fostering bioeconomy as a general issue. So, and another plan, for example, that is the plan for accelerating the growth. Also, we had a lot of investments in the energy transition project. So there is a lot of efforts, and the challenge sometimes is more how to integrate all these plans with a broader long-term energy vision. And we've been trying to connect with all the ministries and trying to set this framework that we see in the long-term energy scenarios that we develop to somehow set the scene for this kind of investments. But at this point, is a very hot topic in Brazil, and we see that we are moving forward.
Thanks for that. Before we move on to the next set of questions, are there any other representatives from countries who'd like to add to this from your perspective, just before we move on?
My name is Hans-Josef Hell. I was member of the German parliament from 1998 until 2015, and I drafted the renewable energy law in 2000 that was the basic for the world growth of renewables. And now I'm member of the IRENA Coalition of Action in the working group 100% Renewables. What the topics here, how to finance renewables. Two keys are very, very important. First is optimism, and second is necessity. Optimism means we can create 100% renewables in a short time, not on long-term run. Some do it already. Today, look to Costa Rica or others. We should create scenarios that do not go in a linear growth rate, but in the reality is possible exponential growth rates. When you look to China, they are doubling renewables every 2 years at the moment. When they go on with this exponential growth rates, they can have 100% renewable electricity in 10 years. Not 2060, what China believes on their growth rates. So this is optimistic. Make it. We with the Energy Watch Group, we simulated in the world, and Irina made with Coalition of Action a paper beginning of this year to summarize all the studies who look to 100% renewables. You can look to this paper and you will find it from Lappeenranta University in Finland or from Mark Jacobson in Stanford University, Sydney or others. So that's the point, optimistic. And the point necessity is we must look to the world, how serious the world is. When we hear Antonio Guterres, the humankind is on the pathway to the climate hell, then he has right. 60% of all greenhouse gas emissions are combined with the use, with the burning of oil, gas, coal. Therefore, the switch to 100% renewables in a short term is decisive for the world to save the humankind. We have not time for 2050, 2060, 2070. We must cut it in 10 years, and it is possible. And therefore, I think it is very important that all the scenarios should look to 100% renewables in a short time. It is possible. Last point is, when you have a long time 100% renewables, that's a message for the fossil and nuclear industry to invest into fossil and nuclear, because otherwise we cannot have energy security. And then we have the gap for financing for renewables because the money flows into fossil and into nuclear. So that's the point. Make optimism and necessary scenarios, then we have the chance to make the transformation in the world much, much faster.
Thanks for that. Okay, I think we're going to move on to our next set of questions targeted to the financial institutions that we have, I believe, mostly online. And I think, Natasha, you had prepared some remarks in a few slides. Would you like to start with sharing those?
Yes, yes. Good morning. Can you hear me well? Or can you see me well?
All good. We can hear and see you.
Okay, perfect. So let me share my screen and let me know when you see it. Can you see my screen? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So good morning, everyone. My name is Natasha Marzop. I represent the Inter-American Development Bank, and I wanted to thank Irina for inviting us for this 5th International Forum on Long-Term Scenario for the Clean Energy Transition. I am going to talk to you a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry, I think you are hearing an echo, no?
We don't hear an echo, I don't think.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, it seems that it's complicated to share. Let me double check why I'm not able to share this slide. Just give me 1 second, please. There we go. All right. Okay, let me share again with you. Can you see? Can you see my
Yes,
slides?
we can see.
Perfect.
Yes.
All right, so let me start. So what I wanted to talk to you about on behalf of IDB first are the kind of challenges that we see in Latin America. So IDB is, I'm sorry, I'm hearing an echo, so it's very difficult to, yeah, maybe, can you hear me now? Can I have a sum up? Can you hear me? You can? Okay, perfect. If you can, just let me know in the chat. So the IDB group is actually composed of three entities. IDB, which is the public sector arm, which is where I work, IDB Invest, which is our private sector arm, and IDB Lab, that is our innovation lab, mostly for pilot projects and small projects. At the IDB, we support the region, energy transition, and meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. We are supporting LAC, Latin America and the Caribbean, achieving a resilient, low carbon, and inclusive energy transition to reduce poverty and inequality, address climate challenges, and bolster sustainable regional growth. As some you already know, I heard our Colombian and Chilean and Brazilian colleagues, Latin America and the Caribbean is the cleanest energy region in the world. 60% of the electricity is generated from renewables, solar, wind, and hydros. In terms of challenges to reach an inclusive energy transition and decarbonization of the economies, we estimate that the investment needs need to go up to $150 billion per year by 2030. Energy access has made tremendous progress in Latin America. The rate of access is about 97% across the region, but you still have close to 16 million people without access to electricity and 81 million persons without access to clean cooking fuels. In terms of energy prices, which is also one of the challenges to reaching energy transition and decarbonization, electricity prices across the region are about 143 megawatt per hour, which is above the United States rate of 106, or China, which is close to 93 megawatt per hour. Electricity losses are estimated about 17% across the region, which represents between $10 and $16 billion of losses. So how does the energy planning framework actually fall into place with respect to those challenges? What we see is that planning is absolutely fundamental to identify energy and investment needs. In particular, the challenges that are faced by the region in terms of planning include a higher level of uncertainty, for example, anything that is related to technology and future demand, restrictions that are not fully incorporated in traditional planning efforts in Latin America and the Caribbean. For example, the permitting process to build infrastructure requires a permitting process that lasts up to 7 years. That has been what we have estimated in a recent study that we have done. And the power systems are not necessarily aligned with a long-term energy planning for net zero. As you integrate more and more renewables, your power planning systems need to be incorporating the increasing amount of renewables that is in the region. So how do you go by planning and materializing those investments? This is where the role of regulation comes in. Whether you are looking into expanding renewable energy generation, transmission, distribution, regulation plays a key role. And this is where regulation must translate the planning into investments. And for example, auctions have been very successful, of course, in Brazil, in Colombia, in Chile. Permitting is another, instrument that is important in terms of planning in order to have regulation translating planning into investments, distributed energy generation, and the regulatory framework to allow that. And lastly, new sectors, for example, electromobility and green hydrogen, that are also looking into planning as one of the tools that is needed in order to allow for those kind of investments. We are supporting 6 countries in the region in terms of planning: Bolivia, Brazil, Panama, Dominican Republic, Barbados, and Bahamas. And now talking about how those scenarios and long-term scenarios allow us to be able to, have better planning and mobilize climate finance. This is a snapshot of our portfolio, which is about $4 billion, where 75% of our investments go into distribution, transmission, infrastructure, and rural electrification. Our operations are climate finance and Paris finance aligned. Close to 90%, according to the NDB methodology, is aligned with climate finance, and 100% of our operations are aligned with gender. These are some of the partners that we work with: the Climate Investment Fund, the Green Climate Fund, the UK SIP, the Mitigation Action Facility. We also work with other agencies such as the European Investment Bank, the French agency, JICA Korea. And we have, for example, last year been able to mobilize up to $1.4 billion in co-financing from those institutions. This last slide gives you an idea of the kind of partners that I mentioned we have that allow us to have additional concessional financing for reaching carbon neutrality in decarbonization. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any question that you have. I'm not sure if it's me, but I'm not hearing anyone. I can't hear anything.
Now, is that working?
No, it's working. I'm hearing you. Thank you.
Oh, great. Sorry about that. So I was just going to jump in with another question for some of the financial institution representatives that we have on the line. So how do you use the National Energy Plan inputs with climate finance priorities when making investment decisions? I was wondering if maybe we could get Claire Nicholas from the World Bank to take this question in the first instance.
Sure. Yeah, you seem to be hearing me. Thanks a lot, first of all, to Irina for the invitation, and thanks a lot to Natasha and Asami because they set the stage and set the scene very well. And so my intervention will be quite short. I think lots of things have already been said. So when we're looking at LTES and investments in the LTES pathway, one of the first things that we are looking, and it has been mentioned by Asami, is whether or not the LTES was done in consultation with the power sector actors and has been endorsed not only by the government, but is also kind of endorsed by power sector actors and by the utilities in particular, because in many cases, what we're seeing is that the LTES has been done kind of on the side by an environment ministry, for example, and it has not been kind of accepted by the utility, and so the utility is still doing its planning on its own, on its side, and it's not necessarily linked to the long-term goal, long-term decarbonization goal. So what's really important is that the LTES is being scaled down to a 5 to 10 years or maybe even 15 years investment plan that has kind of some endorsement and some visibility, and that will give confidence and trust to the private sector as well by signaling the fact that not only one or two renewable energy projects are coming, but a full pipeline of projects. The fact that an investment is in or endorsed by an LTES or part of an LTES is a good signal for us, because it means that it is normally a no-regret investment for the energy transition. And so while we'll have to do our due diligence and ensure that this specific investment is Paris aligned, it helps us to save time in this process of ensuring that the investment is indeed a no regret one with regards to the transition. And when talking now about like climate financing and how to allocate climate financing when we're thinking about energy transition investments, what's really important is to ensure, I mean, because the energy transition investments are going to be so massive, the private sector participation is absolutely critical. So we're trying to use financing to really enable private sector participation as much as possible. And so not only to finance investment that will help scale up private sector participation, and here I'm mostly thinking about like grid reinforcement, storage, flexibility solutions, but also more and more we are looking at alternative instruments like risk mitigation instruments and guarantees and so on that will facilitate private sector participation while not necessarily being direct investment into an asset. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Claire. I think we also have Vivian on the line. Would you care to share your perspectives on this topic?
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Hopefully you can hear me.
We can hear you and we can see you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the kind invitation. Just to mention, I'm representing Climate Compatible Growth, which is a UK aid-funded consortium of leading British universities supporting climate transition in the Global South through applied research and capacity building. And unfortunately, I have an echo again. I'm not sure if we can get rid of the echo. What I wanted to mention is that climate compatible growth is aligning its efforts in the climate transition space along the data to deal framework, which is something that we have derived together with Irina and many other partners, and which is inspired by several successful cases from the Latin America region, where a structured process of political facilitation combined with solid technical analysis has been successful in unlocking billions of dollars of climate finance for energy transition, with Costa Rica being the flagship example, but also other cases such as the Dominican Republic and Uruguay, for example, with those case studies now being quite well documented. Data to deal refers to actions taken in an integrated manner along an entire process that runs all the way from data collection, development planning, national finance strategies, project finance structures, to the agreement of transactions. Within this data to deal pipeline, a particularly critical issue is to build bridges between the technical planning process, often driven by the Ministry of Energy, and the financial mobilization process, usually driven by the Ministry of Finance. We've reached a point now where many countries have succeeded in producing solid energy transition plans, but it's much less clear how these plans will be financed and whether they're actually affordable for the countries. In order to respond to this issue, CCG has been working on the development of an open source modeling tool that bridges the planning and financing perspective, and which we're calling MinFin. What MinFin does is that it ingests the investment needs that are generated by energy planning models, and it calculates what these could cost to finance given the real historic financing conditions faced by any particular country. Importantly, it also evaluates whether the sector cash flows, the funding streams available, are actually adequate to service the associated debt, and hence whether the net zero mortgage payment, if you like, is actually affordable. This is based on the important principle that there's no financing without funding. Often we talk a lot about the financing challenge, but we omit to look at the very weak funding flows available in the sector. We're currently in the process of developing a finance track to complement our energy planning capacity building activities through the energy modeling platform, which is co-organized with the Optimus community. We've now conducted a pilot analysis using the MinFin tool in some 10 countries, and there are certain lessons that are emerging, and I'd just like to finish with these. First is that the net zero energy transition plan is often unaffordable or rapidly becomes unaffordable under business as usual financing and cash flow conditions. Secondly, we find that the financing terms and conditions available to a country have a huge impact on the affordability of net zero. This means that countries need to work on reducing financing costs, both by accessing more concessional finance, but also by taking measures to reduce country risk. In many countries, utility cash flows are extremely weak, and this makes the energy transition unaffordable and likely necessitates energy price increments, which then raise justice issues. Who pays for their transition? Domestic consumers through higher energy prices, or the international community through more concessional finance? We also find that fossil fuel expenditure savings can be very substantial over time and should ideally be ring-fenced to help cover the financing costs associated with energy transition investments. And finally, comparing net zero and least cost energy plans provides a solid objective basis for assessing how much climate finance any particular country may need in the future. So we look forward to further discussion on this, and I'd like to hand it back to you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vivian. Okay, I think pivoting back to some additional questions to those in the room and online, I wanted to ask, what are some of the main challenges and barriers to aligning energy planning frameworks with climate finance requirements? And in your view, how can these be addressed? I think we do have a few additional confirmed interventions, so feel free to answer that question or provide your own thoughts. And maybe Alessia from Get Thought Transform, if you'd like to jump in.
Yes. Thank you for do you hear me? Yes. For allowing me to be here and to talk. It's rather difficult to find now other elements to add to all the many points which have been done today. And it's really great to hear that many countries are putting energy at the center of everything. But what we see in our experience is that unfortunately, this is obviously not the case everywhere. And while in, let's say, the circumstances where we hire, if I may quote you, we do sometimes tend to preach to the choir in the sense of the people who already know all these elements. But we do think that there is still worldwide, unfortunately, in many countries, a lack of knowledge and understanding of what actually energy policy can deliver in terms of policy insights and in terms of planning foresight. And therefore, ensuring that there are the framework conditions which align sectors and different institutions. Sometimes one also has the impression that non-energy sector stakeholders forget the importance of energy, that basically actually very few things work without energy. Even things which often are considered slightly unrelated, like agriculture, relies actually a lot on energy, or at least on energy products. Even fertilizer production is dependent on, at least in its current production form, is dependent on energy. Often, as was mentioned also by Vivian, not in all countries finance ministries are in any way or involved in energy planning. Energy planning is obviously seen as something like for technicians, because people confuse energy and electricity and think it's only about distribution planning and very small things. So although I believe we have been making many steps forward in this, I do still believe there is a lot of work to be done in terms of making sure that we as more technical people in some way are very precise in our terminology ourselves in order to make sure to avoid these misunderstandings, and in order to help that everybody understands that energy planning is something which we have assets which not only require huge money and capital costs, they're also there for a long time. Things that we build today, depending on what they are, PV panels or power lines, they're going to be around for 20 to 50 plus years. And this is something we all need to remember, that it's not about talking about our next TV. So I think these are just very important considerations, which then obviously have a link to the financing, etc. We're talking about assets which not only have huge capitals, but are allowed. And these are the things that we see often are lacking, and therefore people don't understand the huge importance of all this, even though between us, I think we have such an agreement. That was the few things I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think we also have Andrea Weiner from REN 21 in the room, if you'd care to share.
Hi. Yes. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. And thank you, Irina, for having us today. Just very briefly, for those who don't know us, REN 21 is a global community of players of renewable energy. So our members are government and intergovernmental organizations, NGOs, industry associations, and academia. And we provide data and analysis of global developments in technology, policy, and markets. So I can only echo everything that has been said already. Just some numbers echoing what Hans Joseph said recently. Globally, renewables are barely 13% of global total final energy consumption. So while power is around 30%, power is just 23% of global energy consumption. There's indeed a very big disparities across geographies, but there's also disparities among end-use sectors. And what has just said between agriculture, industry, and buildings, this goes between 15 and 17% of penetration of renewables. When it comes to transport, is near not even 4%. So we see also the gaps in investments had been highlighted previously, whether it's in generation, grid, storage, flexibility. Globally, we need to speed up a lot. And of course, in the investment, there's of course big gaps in the cost of capitals between low income and high income countries. So what we see, again, this has been said, there's a need for integrated planning and policies that breach the end use sector and leverage all the end uses sectors with the transformative potential of renewals on the socioeconomic possibilities that accounts for value creation, industrial development, local manufacturing, jobs, and including, of course, civil society in this process, so we can bring together and leverage all these aspects to leverage investment. And while the question would be, I mean, I see some policymakers here have already discussed reaching these sectors, but how this can be effectively implemented. Thank you very much. I hope it was not too long.
Thank you, Andrea. And now we have Lucia Frizzelli, if you'd like to share your perspectives. I believe you're on the line.
Sure. Thank you so much, Irina, for having me and for organizing this. By way of introduction, my name is Lucia Fuselli. I'm the founder of Climate Strategies Consulting. We work with governments, investors, and companies on clean energy, climate finance. I've been working on clean energy investments in the past 10 years within Europe for the European Investment Bank, AFD, and globally with the Green Climate Fund. So from a climate finance perspective, and I feel I'm kind of recapping everything that has been said so far, appraising a project pipeline, particularly for climate finance, I think entails attention to the scope, so to the quality of the project and the program, as much as to the enabling context or the readiness. And so long-term scenario planning is important to define both the scope and the readiness. And it became key, especially in countries where the energy market structure is not conducive of project finance, or in those countries that have some sort of socioeconomic volatilities, because financiers want to understand how the plans address project pipeline and readiness, in particular the country's ability to maintain, because yes, as has been correctly said, we are talking of investments that last 15, 20 years and more. So if I have to summarize the work streams for scenario planning. We have reflected on the fact that there are several forms of scenario planning, but kind of how to go about it and how to coordinate it. I would say, first of all, climate financiers need to see that the country or the proponent does make its strategic decision. So the pipeline is located into a context that has made a strategic decision, meaning how do the countries match its future demand with the energy mix? How does it balance electrification and molecules? Does it want nuclear? How the supply chain is diversified to address volatility. I mean, in Europe, we all know what happens if your supply chain is not well diversified, and that helps defining the pipeline. And there is also important, and I think it's been mentioned already, to evaluate the demand assessment. So, as climate financier wants to see if there's demand for what is produced or for what is generated. So that becomes important. And then another important work stream is planning the coordination of 4 subsectors: generation, transmission, and distribution, climate programming, which is the climate programming that is done by the NDA, and that means decarbonization, but also resilience of the infrastructure, and transport infrastructure. Transport infrastructure, why? Because in the end, the transport is going to be increasingly interlaced with energy, be it hydrogen supply chains or charging infrastructure for the electric vehicles. So these 4 subsectors, they need to be developed in parallel, and that's, as a climate financier, what you're asking yourself, in parallel and in synergy, to prioritize the project pipeline efficiently and avoid being trapped in catch-22 loops. For example, we have the renewables, but we don't have the grid. We are planning for financing of e-mobility without the charging infrastructure. And also, in order to start monitoring the project indicators that are relevant for climate financier, not necessarily they are the same indicators as for private investors. As climate financiers who look for GHG abatement, socioeconomic impacts indicators, and so on and so forth. So in this way, the pipeline is prioritized, and also working together. And this and Vivian comment was very relevant there. Working together with the finance ministry to understand how much the public finance can bear helps also dimensioning the financing needs. So you go to the climate financiers already with an idea how much do you need and how that coordinates for that program with all the context that you have, And then the third work streams, I would say, is about the enabling contents. That's what gives you the readiness that is evaluated by climate financiers. So once define the pipeline, prioritize the pipeline, then planning the evolution of the enabling context. That means capacity, permitting, of course, and it's been underlined, supply chains, and policy and regulation. And when it comes to policy regulation, there needs to be also policy regulation that manages the variations in my planning, in the country planning, the volatility. And policy regulation also aimed at giving investors security. So policy regulation needs to be done a bit with the stakeholders in mind. And having the enabling context evolution identified and planned also allows to identify technical assistance need, because where do you see the gap? You go already to the climate financier with exactly what you need to fill and what are the UTI needs. And also to develop a market structure that is conductive of investments. And we've been mentioning tariffs, subsidies. And finally, I would say 3 overarching recommendation when approaching climate finance. Engage financier in order of concessionality. Climate financiers tend to have the highest level of concessionality, but also the longest lead times in terms of, starting from concept note of the project to financial close. And they are followed by multilateral lenders. Multilateral lenders also have concessionality, notably. These 2 stakeholders tend to focus on national catalytic programs, but their co-financing can serve as pipeline de-risking as quality stamp. And that in turn crowds in private investors. We have heard it from IADB, from the World Bank. Private investors tend to have shorter lead times and tend to have project-based. And potentially there is also an increasing focus on ESG ambitions. So reconnecting how the climate financing is integrated in the planning to how these contributes to the ESG ambitions of investment is going to become increasingly important. And in engaging financiers, it's good to consider which specific financial products are needed for the de-risking. There has been a mention of guarantees, but also, for example, in currency lending for certain countries. These are aspects that then are left sometimes for the end of the negotiation, where you're already negotiating the term sheet. But they take time because they are complex instruments a bit more complex instruments to structure, and sometimes you have to find specific partners for the financing of that specific element. So considering that early on helps, and consider technology trends, the impact on the scenarios, and plan the enabling context with stakeholders in mind. I mean, enabling context is fundamentally means enabling the stakeholder to play their role and get their validation. This also has been underlined during the conversation. So that's all from my side. I hope I provided a bit the climate finances perspective, but also a recap of what's been said so far. Over.
Thank you, Lucia, for your contribution. Okay, so we're going to open it up to more to the floor for moderated discussion now. And the first question I wanted to ask is, what do you think, or how do you think collaboration between governments, financial institutions, and the other relevant global bodies can be improved and enhanced moving forward in order to help secure funding for clean energy projects? Does anyone from the countries have a view on this, at least to start? Anyone else not from the countries? Please go ahead.
I can share with you the experience of Germany with financing. Until 2012, 80% of financing came from private people, small and medium entrepreneurs, startups, farmers, and not from the big money from the utilities. This was a tremendous growth, and the basic for that was the feed-in tariff. This gave everyone the possibility to finance because the banks told them there is a law that brings a security of investment, and you can have co-financing by the law. Then came a switch in Germany from feed-in tariff, not by the law stimulated, to auctioning system. And the auctioning system means two important points. First, it is a limitation. A limitation cannot allow an exponential growth rate, what we had until 2012. And the second is, auctioning is a very complex system with a lot of bureaucracy, with a lot of things what the people have to bring that they can win an auction. This is only possible for big finance structures and not for the decentralized communities, for cooperatives and others. And therefore, in Germany, the investment collapsed since 2012 in photovoltaic from 7 gigawatt in 1 year to 1 gigawatt. In wind power in 2017, 5 gigawatt to 1 gigawatt in 1 year. So you must look exactly and discuss it with your politicians. What political framework is important that the whole society, as well big finance structures, as well as decentralized investment with communities and others, can be achieved. Can be achieved. That is very important. You must look to the political frameworks. And my advice is go to feed-in tariff fixed by the government and legislation and not to auctioning. In some big infrastructures like offshore wind parks, auctioning can make sense, but not on decentralized small like photovoltaics and bioenergy and others.
Thank you for that. I guess a follow-up question based on this experience, how did you go about the sort of collaboration of the different stakeholders in that case? So you mentioned lots of different folks when you talk about arriving at that feed-in tariff. How did you go about collaborating between all of the various stakeholders to arrive at sort of the understanding that that was sort of the best approach forward? And what do you think we can learn from that and apply moving forward in this context?
The collaborating is that the people did it by themselves. They organize when they have the basic with a good political framework that they can take part. Then in Germany, in the years from 2000 until 2012 and 15, we have 1,000 events where the people in the towns, in the villages came together and made for themselves the informations to do it. They learned it for them and give it to others. So it was a decentralized, a high democratic development that the people themselves educated themselves. But the basic was we need a political framework that gives the possibility to invest their private money. And this is feed-in tariff.
Thanks for that. Maybe, Gustavo, can I pick on you? Oh, do we have someone down there that I can't see? Sorry. Please go ahead. I think I'm having trouble seeing.
Can you hear me? I just wanted to, I hope this isn't taking too many steps back, but one thing that sort of struck me so far in the discussions is sort of like, what do we mean when we say the phrase energy planning? And I'm quite struck that quite often what we're really talking about is not energy planning, it's only really the supply side of energy planning, and it's only, in fact, usually only mean electricity planning. And when you think about the sort of overall task that we're talking about, avoiding climate catastrophe, shall we say, not to put it too strongly, I don't think that's enough. I think we have to be broader in our thinking, and it's very difficult to be broader in our thinking. But I do think that the demand side is not getting nearly enough attention, and the integration between the demand and supply side is not getting nearly enough attention. It's obvious why it's not getting enough attention, because it's really hard to do, right? It's really hard, particularly in democratic societies, to talk about the demand side, let alone to talk about conservation and things like that, which are almost taboo to talk about. And yet they're absolutely crucial. Hans, you were talking about how it's important to be optimistic, and I think it's quite easy to be optimistic about renewables, but at the same time to be pessimistic about sort of low carbon transitions. And I think there's, you can see a lot of trends emerging just recently, like, for example, I come from the US, so it's easy to be cynical if you come from the US. But, you're seeing like a huge growth in, even where EVs are emerging, they're emerging as massive SUVs that themselves are going to consume huge amounts of electricity and huge amounts of lithium, et cetera. You're also seeing the emergence of AI, which is going to mop up most of the new renewable generation that's coming. So, unless you focus on the demand side and think about it in a very integrated fashion, I think we're in big trouble. And I think we need to focus a lot more on the demand side. And even, I would say you need to think about conservation as well. Very difficult to do. But I think we have to think about whether the toolkits that we have, I don't just mean in terms of models, but I mean in terms of the way governments think about planning, whether it really enables us to think about those topics sufficiently. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll go to Claire on the line first, and then we'll hand it back to you in the room.
Thank you. It was to mention a caveat to the feed-in tariff comment, because while this is maybe a policy that makes sense in countries where the grid is very strong and where the power systems are quite developed, it does not apply everywhere. And Vietnam is one very good example of I wouldn't say a failed feed-in tariff policy, but yeah, it was not a complete success. So because with the feed-in tariff, like in less than a year, more than 9 or 10 gigawatt were deployed, which represented, if I remember well, more than 10% of the installed capacity before that. And most of this DPV ended up being curtailed, which is also the case of the large scale. Of I think more than 20% of the large scale VRE generation in Vietnam. And so it's very important to have an integrated planning with the demand side, that's true. But for the less advanced systems, also between the generation and the transmission and distribution side, because it's oftentimes overlooked. And auctions, for example, can enable to time the deployment of renewable energy generation and to ensure that the transmission and distribution development will go on at the necessary pace, I would say. So yeah, feed-in tariff maybe, but really not everywhere, and it really needs to be fought for. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Okay, back over to the room.
Direct to Vietnam. Vietnam showed only 2 years long that the feed-in tariff is the best way. They had exponential growth rates in photovoltaics for decentralized people, for homes and others. What in Vietnam failed was the integration of the renewable energy into the grid, and therefore they must stop it. But it is not an argument against the feed-in tariff. It is an argument to do more than the feed-in tariff, integration, storaging, and plenty other things.
Okay, it was just, oh yeah, my name is Alexandra, and I'm from the Danish Energy Agency. And just Hans Joseph's first comment about not just thinking about investing and financing the green energy, but also taking away the investments from the fossil industry. It just got me thinking that in Denmark, we are part of this Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, where we have pledged to stop all investments in new fossil fuel subtraction from the North Sea, and also stop all oil and gas production in the North Sea by 2050. So the stop for new investments is now. And I think this is a really important message to show to the investors that you like just not just saying it's a bad business to invest in fossil fuels, but you are basically not allowed to make these investments. So that's a way of forcing the money flow into another direction away from the fossil fuels. And we had this when the energy crisis hit. It was a bit hard to keep up with those goals. We allowed for some expansion of existing oil fields, but I still think that the message holds, and I hope that other countries will follow and maybe join the alliance and to set goals for stopping those investments in the fossil fuel industry.
Thank you. I think we have Daniel Lago on the line who had a question. If you could please also share your role in. Can you hear us, Daniel? Can you hear us online, participants? Oh, Daniel, please unmute. Can you hear us, Lucia? Can you hear us, anyone?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Daniel, please unmute.
Okay. I think we'll carry on in that case. I guess my next question is, how can LTES be improved to better align with the expectations of climate finance institutions to help attract more investment? Does anyone have any perspectives or thoughts to share on this? Or potentially, what do you need to help in this space? What will help you? Maybe Gustavo, again, I'll pick on you as the sort of Brazil co-host here to share your thoughts.
Okay. I think the answer for me is a little bit similar to the question before, because LTS is one of the instruments of energy planning, and we need to be able to transform these scenarios and all these in instruments at the end of the day that would foster the investments in any kind of new technologies or something like that. And I was wondering while friends were talking here that we have some examples, some good examples and some not so good examples in Brazil. For example, the transmission auctions, for example, is a huge success in Brazil. Last year we had like 60 billion investments on energy transmission, and this is because we have the energy plans with long-term energy view, and then it's you have this transformation of the necessities of that plan in something that is needed, and of course it is a process that takes a long time, but time after time, then the market recognizes it as an instrument, and it makes easier to finance this kind of project and all these things. So transforming this view in some instruments which would foster the investments is something that is needed. And of course, when we talk about long-term energy scenarios, we are talking about new technologies, and new technologies need to be, we need to be able to recognize that it's a different type of financing. You must be more able to deal with more risks, and then I think government plays an important role, maybe as a starter or using the development banks, thinking about broader effects that one technology can have in a supply chain in the country. And in Brazil, our National Development Bank was key for the development, for example, of wind industry in Brazil. And it was articulated, of course, with the energy planning structure, because we have auctions and we have all these things, and they were kind of supporting at the very beginning. And then it takes, when it got bigger, then the market comes also, and this is something that is important. So I think the main point is to identify instruments in which we could bring the financial sector to be more able to deal with these new necessities of the energy system in a general way.
Thanks for sharing. We also have Natasha on the line, who I think wanted to jump in.
Yes, thank you so much, Elizabeth. I just wanted to add a little bit to the discussion about, you know, the nexus of planning together with financing. So we know, for example, in Latin America, that they have, for most countries, joined what we call the RELAC, which is the renewable energy initiative that aims to have 80% of renewable in Latin America by 2030. And what does that mean in terms of planning? You need to have long-term planning to be able to not only enable regulatory framework, but you also need long-term planning to be able to know what's the cost of your investments. So, for example, in the International Energy Agency report that was produced last year, where we co-edited that report, they estimate that you need about $240 billion in investments every year in Latin America to reach the net zero energy scenario, right? So, for example, we have seen that I can give you the example of Chile, which is one of the countries I've worked on for the past 3 years. So, Chile, for example, has dramatically increased its level of renewable energy. And they have had auctions that have been very successful and pricings that have been very successful. But what has happened in Chile? The expansion of the generation for renewable has been absolutely phenomenal, but the expansion of transmission has not really happened. And as a result, you have had bottlenecks where you have a lot of energy that is generated from renewable that cannot then be transported because the transmission lines have not been expanded and they have not been either built. And this really resulted in a very difficult situation in Chile in about 12 months ago. Now things are getting better. But the issue is really related to planning. There has not been a planning, of the expansion of the transmission grid. So planning is very important, not only for the generation part, but also for the distribution and transmission part. And then the other part of planning really has to do with how do you build those investments? And you need, someone I think mentioned it earlier, you need long-term investments, and that requires long-term financing. Long-term financing requires also concessional financing because some of those new technologies, for example, green hydrogen, require, really significant upfront capital. And for that, you need to have long-term financing that also includes concessional financing. So you have to understand the whole cascade of events, right? Planning is very, very important. And we support planning, particularly, for the increase and the incorporation of new renewables. And then planning not only at the generation level, but distribution and transmission level as well. And to have those investments mapped out within a planning tool allows you then to unlock different, funding and funding facilities, from IDB or from other organizations. And funding itself is very important because then we rely on partners to help us with the concessionality part. So I just wanted to add a little bit to the discussion because we have really seen that planning is really, really key in order for countries to meet, their renewable energy goals by 2030.
Thank you, Natasha. Given you mentioned Chile, I was wondering if Francisco, you want to jump in with your thoughts.
Of course. Thank you very much. I totally agree with Natasha and her point of view of the electrical expansion in Chile. It is right that we have a lot of growth on the generation side of PV plants on the north side of the country, and the transmission is not quite as the same rhythm. Maybe I kind of disagree with Natasha. It's not a planification problem or fault. I think, as I said before, the energy sector in Chile is private. So we have a lot of sun in the north, and every company is free to install their own plant. And we have some transmission constraints, right? But we cannot force those companies not to install more capacity. Please stop. And they keep going. And they build and build and build some more. And we can't transmit that much energy. But there's still a lot of, today, we have a lot of more installing capacity every day. So, and there's power lines project, right? But we are planning some 3,000 megawatt capacity on one line, our first DC line. But we have a lot of problems in installing that. We call it the permit problems. So we are planning that power line to 2029. So until then, we'll keep going on that same problem because to get all the permissions to build a line takes a lot of time, a lot. So we know for a fact that when 2029, when that line is finally start working, it's going to be at full capacity, and we need another one. And so we are planning. Oh, what will we do? Okay, let's plan another line, but with the 10 or 15 years time frame when you think the line and when you operate the line, we're gonna keep going with the problem. So please stop building.
Thank you. I think we have a comment over here.
Hear me now? My name is Ilija Batas Bjelic. I'm coming from Serbia, from Institute of Technical Science of Serbian Academy of Science. So I would like to answer to your very good question, which I was thinking few minutes, and now I think I can have an answer. So basically, your question is on that the governments doesn't have enough money. So usually governments are bankrupt. So they, let's say, go to the banks and then ask for money to invest. And when they go to bank, then or some let's say consultancy like Ernst Young, they can offer ACG financing. So they have some notes. They score your project. But the problem is that banks are scoring the projects separately, and you can have a very good project, but then you missed some project in that puzzle. And this is different from energy planning, where you have integrated energy planning, when you include all the projects you need in order to achieve sustainability. So that's kind of different approach. That's my discussion. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Malene from the Danish Energy Agency. I just wanted to add to the discussion about the transmission line bottleneck. It sounds like in Chile it takes longer to build the transmission line than that it takes to build solar power. So what, and I guess that's the same problem in many places. Well, I just wanted to share what we do in Denmark. At the Danish Energy Agency, we prepare every year a report where we outline all the planned projects for until 2050. And we prepare that report and give it to the utility company so that they can plan after it. And then we also add all the projects that we at the Danish Energy Agency think would be needed. So not only the actual projects that are in pipeline, but also the projects that we think will be necessary in order to meet the climate goal. And we have to make some quite rough assumptions on that. I mean, we have to assume that more wind power will be built than what is currently in the pipeline. But we do that every year as a report to the utility company. And that we have all sorts of problems with that, because we have huge uncertainties and so on. But we have some orders of magnitude. And it's updated every year, so that the utility company can have some sort of guideline to plan after.
I will underline the point that subsidizing with public money must fail for a great exponential growth rates for renewables, because the public budgets are overloaded with debts. There is mostly no money enough to have them. Therefore, we must find the investment with the private money. Private money is so plenty in the world, and we must allocate it that the private money will flow into renewables and not into fossil and nuclear. And feed-in tariff is this basic. when you make it correct, when you do not pay the surcharge for feed-in tariff from public money. In Germany, since 2 years, they did it, the politicians. A great mistake, because today we have the discussion in the public households how to finance the renewable growth. There is no money in the public budget. As long as we paid it from the electricity price from the consumer, there was no discussion about this. No, and we could create it. And there is also a fear that the feed-in tariff would raise the electricity price too high for the consumers. That's the discussion from the past. 10 years ago, it was a problem, yes. But now renewables are the cheapest option of investment into energy by the whole. Therefore, they cannot raise the electricity price to an amount that the consumers could not pay it. Therefore, it is the best option. And the last point, what I mentioned with Vietnam and others, yes, feed-in tariff mostly like it used in the most nations, brings only an investment in solar here, in wind power there, in bioenergy on other place, and the grid operators do not know how to integrate it. Therefore, I made a proposal, it is not realized anywhere in the world. Make a feed-in tariff with combined renewable energies plus storage. That the investors with a combined investment can bring the electricity to the grid like the grid operators needs it. During the night, the solar industry over the storage. When you made an intelligent feed-in tariff system like this way, then we have the problems solved.
Thank you, Francisco. Did you want to jump in?
Well, thank you very much for all your proposals. Keep that in mind. I think on Chile, it's got a really nice problem. I think every problem is an opportunity. I'll just point it like that. And we have a lot of sun on the north. It's one of the sunniest places in the world. So everyone wants to be there. And the transmission problem, yeah, it's a problem, but we are thinking outside of the box, maybe. We are planning a lot of storage, for example. 2 years ago, we weren't talking about storage, and now it's our main concern. We have 2 gigawatts on storage projects to build on the next year. So we're very happy about that to use that energy that we are not using today, where we have a lot of curtailment, and we're happy. And new projects on solar power, I forgot to say that, they're also coming with storage, their own storage. So it's a very good solution to use the power line on the day and on the night. And I think that when you are a private investor, you must take all those things on account. And maybe, okay, you have the best place on the world for sun energy, okay, but on the center of the country, it's not bad either. So you can start your project on the center of the country where the demand is. You forget about the transmission problem, and you can make your project even more profitable than on the sunniest place on the world. So I think it should be very nice to keep on account. And on second thought, another issue, if I have a couple of minutes, yeah. I was thinking about in private investing. From a private point of view, I think that I'll preach to the choir, as so many people said. But I think for a private point of view, you need certainty, always. That's the most important thing when you invest in a project. So when you need, for example, political certainty, it's very common, as my point of view. I'll get on the political arena that when a government leaves and there comes usually the other government, the other side government, they say, oh, that one that went is very bad, so I'll erase everything and I'll build on my own. So there are many policies, for example, government that denies global warming, and it's not very good for a policy, for a long-term policy. And the certainty, I'll go back to that point, certainty, because you build something, you build a plan, a long-term plan, you convince all that investment, and then comes the another government and said, okay, let's erase that and start over. So I think it's not good from outside investments. So I think it's very important thing to keep that in account. And on the other hand, prices. I think by being back to electrical thing, the price of electricity, I think it's very important. Natasha showed the difference on different countries on the price of electricity. And I thought on Chile, we are having kind of a trouble too. Before the pandemic, we had a social uprising, and the government decided to freeze the price of electricity for people. It seemed like a good idea in the middle of a social uprising and then the pandemic and everything. But when you froze the price of electricity, sorry, no, now, okay. So they froze the price of electricity, and it seemed like a good idea at the time, maybe. But we became we have accumulating that price because we have pandemic, we had a war on where, and the prices went up and we froze. So we became in debt to the private company. And now, 5 years later, we are forced to pay that debt, and the prices of electricity for common people is rising about 80%. So when the prices of your monthly bill rises 80%, you're gonna shift from electricity. Believe me, you're going back to, I don't know, your diesel truck. You're going back to your kerosene stove. You're going back to everything but electricity. So in a long-term energy plan, it will change. It will change. So you need certainty. You need stability. You need all those things to make that possible. The appropriate investment. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we had two raised hands in the room. Charlie in the corner, I think, had his hand raised for a while. I can't see him. And then over here next.
Thank you very much. I would like to echo something that you said previously. And when we discuss, the grids and capacity, I would like to add the flexibility beyond storage to the discussion, and flexibility linking, of course, demand use sectors in planning. But I think this is a question for financial institutions, because flexibility and demand side management is a lot of OPEX as compared to CAPEX. And I think this poses other financing questions. That is just a question for financial institutions. How can we address this?
Thanks. I just wanted to add, I really like the interchange you had about whether the problem was with planning or not in Chile. And I thought that sort of raised this really interesting question of, again, what are we defining how do we define energy planning? Because it seems also the way you phrased the question about how do we make long-term energy scenarios sort of meet the needs of financing institutions. I kind of thought, oh, well, you could put that the other way around, couldn't you? You could say, how do we make sure that financing institutions meet the needs of long-term energy planning? Because some things I think are a bigger question. I keep thinking today, we're trying to steer a super tanker with a small paddle here. We've got a very big question. We've got the biggest problem that the planet is facing, and the tools to address that problem are not sufficient given the size of the challenge, right? So, you know, again with energy planning, a lot of it doesn't come down to, like in Chile, does it come down to the fact that we didn't do our modeling right, or we weren't sort of planning the system correctly, you know, quantitatively, or does it come down to the fact that, you know, we needed to sort of take a bigger perspective on things, and, you know, probably someone should have been thinking about the transmission 10 years earlier, but they weren't, because it's easy to build, it's easy to put in solar panels, but it's really hard to put in transmission lines, right? But I think there's even broader questions that are coming. You know, if we think it's been difficult so far, we ain't seen nothing yet, right? Because we haven't thought about all the really massive changes that are going to be needed on the demand side. You know, once you have this energy transition, so you know, I think we need to sort of broaden how we think of energy planning to address these broader challenges that are rapidly approaching and are, you know, coming at us very fast now.
Thank you, Farhan. You've been waiting for a while, and then we'll go to Sami.
Yeah, hello everyone. This is Farhan from Energy Planning and Resource Center from Ministry of Planning, Government of Pakistan. Most of the participants either online or the in person discuss about the investment and the financing for the energy transition and the renewable energy. I just wanted to add, being from the developing country, there's also need for the discussion and the investment regarding the switching from the fossil fuel towards the renewable energy. Because if I say, being in Pakistan, more than 40% of power generation is being produced from the fossil fuel. And we have already a lot of capacity that is already a burden on the capacity payments to the end user. Alangsda discussed about something about the fossil fuel investment also. I just want to add that there is some kind of the financing or the investment needed for all those power plant producers who are already in the fossil fuel. They need or they are looking for investment from switching from the fossil fuel to the renewable energy rather than an additional investment to bringing all the renewable power on the other side, but they need from the switching from fossil fuel to the renewable agency, and that will be definitely affect on the end user consumer. Being a Pakistani, I'm facing a lot of power prices just because of the capacity charges, and due to that factor, and we are not allowing, as being a planner, we are not allowing the other capacity from the renewables. We have only 5% renewable in the power generation mix. And that's the reason, because we had already funded or invested in the fossil fuel. And we are now in a middle of situation, neither we can add the renewables more due to the overcapacity, and neither we can minimize the fossil fuel because we have the contract with the IPPs, individual power purchase producers. So there's a need for the developing country to discuss on the investment from switching to the fossils to the renewables. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have raised hands from Asami and then Claire online.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I have a question. So we have been talking about how energy planning can attract and reach out to the financial sector. And we have heard that from the multilateral banks that they are really fully on board, recognizing the importance of energy planning. But when we speak with like private banks, they are not so much in tune with this kind of debate. And I was wondering if how relevant private banks are in this discussion, and if we need to engage them in this discussion, or if this is maybe not so relevant. I would maybe like to hear a perspective from Elizabeth, for example, and would like to know what are the so we've been talking about how to make how energy planning community can improve to attract the investment, but maybe also we should hear from the finance sector how the energy planning can be improved to make the energy planning more relevant for their investment decision. Thank you.
Okay, it's working now. Okay, so maybe I'll just jump in very quickly on that question from the private sector perspective and banks. And I think different banks take different attitudes towards, firstly, net zero. But I guess one thing that at least I've observed is in the private sector, banks are still very much focused on, and again, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but they're very much focused on the next 5 years. They're only required to hold capital to cover losses over the next 5 years at a maximum. Business planning processes cover a 5-year forward-looking period, basically at a maximum, unfortunately. I think a lot of banks have made net zero commitments, and they're now reflecting on that. And what does that actually mean in terms of how do they need to change their strategies in order to be able to accomplish those goals, which in turn will mean, I think, participating in forums like this to get better understanding and more expertise in areas such as the energy sector. But I think that's still, unfortunately, a big barrier. And then just building on something Francisco mentioned earlier in terms of really wanting certainty, and going back to something that I mentioned at the beginning of the session, is that the banks that I've worked with, they look at ranges of different scenarios, but ultimately they want to know what's going to happen. They want to know scenarios, but also what's the probability and the plausibility of that scenario. If we can start sort of assigning more likelihoods, things like that to scenarios, I think potentially that could even sort of directionally help in the private sector. Okay, I think Claire, you also had something you wanted to say.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to answer the question on flexibility and how development banks are dealing with this question of the need for more flexibility. So one of the solutions that has been mentioned by a panelist earlier is the fact that now more and more auctions, when they're launched, are coupled like PV and wind plus storage to ensure that the energy that will be delivered to the grid will be delivered in a way that will be manageable by the operator. And the second point is that with an increased need of flexibility, there is a very, very strong need to build the capacity of the dispatchers, of the grid operator. So I'm talking here about developing country with less advanced power system. And so this is something that we are doing a lot, how to help operators change the way they're dispatching hydropower, flexibilize also the current thermal power plants to ensure that they will be able to deliver as much flexibility to the grid as possible. And with regards to planning, one things that we are moving towards more and more for countries who are developing energy markets are market models, because we need to understand which market design mechanisms will facilitate the energy transition. And in some cases, energy-only markets will be enough in a way, but in others, maybe capacity markets or ancillary services markets are going to be needed as well. And so now, not only are we using, I would say, the regular bread and butter least cost power system planning models, but we are trying in many of our analysis with countries developing markets to couple that with market model analysis to be able to advise our clients as much as possible with regards to the development of the markets. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I think Jessica, sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing, but I think you're next.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention about the Colombian case, and we're still figuring it out again. But what to do when the public money also comes from oil, which is the case of Colombia. It is basically all the state is funded by the royalties of oil and coal. So it's really hard to have the private sector in the conversation because there is a lot of resistance of changing that. And even inside the government, we always going to find resistance of doing some change because there is a lot of fear. So I think one first step, and we'll see how it goes, but I guess it's a good move, is that we are having Ecopetrol, which is the national oil company, involved in all the conversations, trying also to see how the investments in Ecopetrol can be diversified. Of course, most of the investment is still going to oil and gas, but it's a starting point, at least, to having these conversations.
Thank you. And just to note to people in the room who maybe can't see what's going on in Teams, we're just going to take a few extra minutes on this discussion because we started late. So we'll probably finish in around 10 minutes. Natasha, online, did you want to jump in?
Yes, just 3 points because I know they have mentioned them. So I just wanted to make clear for the IDB, we really look into green energy. So we do not finance oil, we don't finance coal, and we don't finance gas. And I think to the lady from Colombia who mentioned just on Ecopetrol joining the table, for us, the planning really starts at the level of a target and policies. So most countries in Latin America and the Caribbean have a target of achieving X percentage of renewable energy. That's where we start, right? And from those renewable energy targets, then you have a series of factors that are then included in terms of policies, in terms of planning, in terms of investments. So I really wanted to highlight that fact that for us, the first discussion is really the renewable energy target that they want to reach by 2030. And from there, a lot of actions happen. So that's the first point. The second point is someone else mentioned OPEX versus CAPEX. I'm not sure who it was. But by definition, when we provide financing for renewable energy projects, whether it is solar, whether it is wind, or it is hydro or rehabilitation of hydropower plants, your OPEX cost is basically zero, right? Because this is a renewable energy source. So for us, if it's a public sector company or state-owned entity, we will of course finance the capex, which requires a lot of upfront capital, and we try to provide, of course, at the sovereign lending price. And if we have other partners, which is what I mentioned, the Green Climate Fund or the Climate Investment Funds, they come in as part of the overall financing structure with more concessionality, and we finance those capex expenses. And on the OPEX side, usually those expenses by public sector companies are covered through the tariff recovery or through the national budget. And then on the last point, which was public versus private funding, Irina, I'm not sure if you have mentioned it, but Irina, together with a lot of other MDBs and private sector banks, has a platform called ETAF, the Energy Transition Accelerator Facility, if I'm not mistaken. And this is a very important initiative that is being led by IRENA. IDB is part of it. I understand the World Bank, but HSBC and other private sector banks are part of it, where they really look at projects, and they looked at projects in